in your view, now knowing the institution after a year, what are the kind of key challenges that we as an institution face in achieving this vision?
What are the key challenges? You don't think I described enough of them already in my talk? Well, I mean, this is genuine. Well, I do think about this as genuine new institution building. And I do think that Stanford's embrace of these, I mean, one of the things that impressed me when I interviewed here is that the leadership of the university got the problem. Because it's not unique. I mean, I've presented this problem in the context of education, but the basic design of the university was sort of set, again, it's another way it was set in place early into the turn of the 20th century. You particularly think about the disciplinary divisions of the social sciences, the professional schools. Much of that was put into place almost 100 years ago. It was designed to address a certain conception of what the problems were. And in some ways, we've solved the simple problems. The problems that we're confronting now as a society are much more complex and require this kind of assembling this diverse colleagueship of expertise that I've described. And universities institutionally are now designed in a way that really works against that. Because, you know, I want to build this team I've described. Say I'm going to work on a problem like one of the ones I'm really interested in is really designing systems so that all children learn to read by grade 3 and acquire the dispositions to use reading to learn. Seems like a fairly straightforward problem. I actually believe it's in our grasp to solve this problem. We know there's some problems where we've got to learn some things. This is a case where I think we know enough, but we need to figure out how to engineer a system to accomplish this. But I need people who know primary literacy. I know people who know adult learning. I think technology is going to be an important part of this, so I need technologists to bring into this group. I need people who know something about organizational change, and particularly a big part of this are the cultural dimensions of organizational change, because to do this, I know I'm going to have to change people's work, and that's a cultural change process. I can kind of go down the list like that, and I can start to talk about the expertise I need to actually build an R&D institute around that problem. Now, as soon as I start saying that, well, my anthropologist, that's probably got to be vetted through the anthro department, and they may have a different conception of what anthropology is than the kind of person I need. My technology people may have my technology folks who hire the technology faculty, they got a view of what they need. That I cannot necessarily get into the university all the academic expertise I need because I got to work through all these different units because they do the hiring. And that's just the academic side. And then this is a problem of practice. I need very good teachers. I need principals, staff developers. I need them part of the group, and I need them as equal members. But I got this problem that clinical appointments are, by definition, second-class citizens in this enterprise. So all of which begins to suggest I need a different kind of context in which to do this work. The leadership at the university at least understand that this is a problem. That's why there is this institute initiative. Whether this actually becomes a university institute or not is a question that will eventually get worked out. But the notion that we have to start experimenting with different ways to organize work in the university if we're going to assemble the expertise to be able to sustain work on these kinds of problems and create the internal incentives within the group, because universities are basically collections of individual scholars. We're the most entrepreneurial of places. I mean, everybody goes out and gets their own money to do their own thing, and the consequence of which is it's like herding cats if you want to try to do this kind of exercise, because we want it to be disciplined by the problem. We want people working on certain kinds of things. But if I generate all my own money, I get to work on what I want to do. So I got to have a different funding mechanism that creates incentives for individuals to sustain long-term work on a core problem. Right, so this is big institutional redesign to figure out how to actually make this happen. And it's a real open question whether the university per se is the right, inside the university, affiliated with the university. This is a real kind of social innovation that we have to work through.
Do you think that the higher education institutions in the US are further along towards informing educational reform in this country than their counterparts are in other parts of the world? The UK, for instance, Europe. Is there a similar engagement in this problem?
Well, Well, it depends. It varies by country, but in general terms, there are traditions in Europe of research institutes. The Max Planck Institutes in Germany are one that I know, that are in some sense are structured to be better because they define a problem area and they put resources into it a period of time, and typically they identify some senior person to build a center of work, and that center exists as long as that person's there, and then they get recompeted over time. But because the resources are assembled around a problem, people are then recruited in to work in the institute, and it's a different kind of institutional apparatus than ours is a much more entrepreneurial free market, but the consequence of which is people work on individual projects. You don't sustain work on a problem. And that's the institutional redesign problem we have to confront. So other countries, I think, do a better job at it. And the other part of it is, that's on the funding side, the development of innovations, and even policy for that matter, in many other countries, is much more connected to professional educators. They have much more of a role in this than is true in the United States. So this kind of clinical research divide is much sharper here than it is in other contexts. Yeah.
What do you think if you think there should be any limits for the job we're going to do here? I'm talking about the relationship between the responsibilities of our academic institution and the government. Do you think there should be any limit for our responsibilities and for our job?
I'm not sure how to answer that question. I do think, and maybe in some sense I'm answering a slightly different question, but I do not see the federal government as solving this problem. I mean, the whole educational enterprise at Washington level is so highly politicized and so contentious that even this administration, which is talking about evidence-based practice and wanting to have real disciplined research, it's become just as ideological enterprise as earlier administrations. So, I just don't see this being solved by the federal government. I think we have to do this. In some ways, I think if we can do this here and demonstrate different ways of working, it might eventually get absorbed into some larger federally supported enterprise. But I'm not optimistic about positive solutions coming from Washington.
I like what you said about the academy getting closer to the practitioners. And I noticed in your model you're maybe suggesting creating schools, universities creating schools. Do you think it's possible to establish a partnership in the way you want with a pre-existing school? And if so, what needs to happen to, I guess, overcome all the obstacles maybe of, teacher and administrator skepticism and all the other things that you run into?
Well, part of the reason we went to starting our own charter schools is because we wanted to recruit people into a school who want to do this kind of work with us. If you're going to do R&D work, you want to have context where you can do rapid prototyping, try some things out. Doesn't work, retry them, revise them and retry them. I don't want to go through a process of every time I go to do something, I got to negotiate up and down the system. I got to talk to the superintendent. I got to get central office clearance, sometimes from several departments. I got to get the principal degree. I got to go classroom by classroom to get teacher's degree. This is a very time-consuming. This is not a good way to do R&D. That's why I said earlier on in my remarks that I thought actually charter management organizations might actually be a more productive route for doing this, because if we got an agreement and they're starting up schools, it's a very different problem. People are hired in to do a kind of work. This is how we do our work here. Then you're coming and asking me to do something on top of my job, which is the way it gets viewed when you try to do this inside an existing public school. So, right now that's where most of the kids are and that's where most of the money is. So yeah, we got to continue to try to figure out where to make this work. But if you ask me what I thought would be a much more productive route for doing this, there's no question where I'd put my own personal money. I'd work on trying to build this in the context of individual charter schools, context of charter management organizations, because this is a much easier problem when you're starting from scratch. It's like the school startup problem is an easier problem than the restructuring of a very dysfunctional school. It's the same kind of issue, I would argue.
Kind of a related question. How do you then take the lessons that you would learn in a school, in a charter school that's organized by the university, and put it out to scale, take it out to the existing public schools?
Well, I mean, example of this work I described to you that we were doing, it actually started in our own charter school and professional education around that charter school for this support system for staff developers. This will now be the next version of the Teachscape platform. This is what they will have, and they'll market to districts come next June. So one of the ways we think about going to scale, that's why I think commercial partners are really a key in doing this R&D work, because universities are very good at developing ideas. We may even get these to the point of being kind of good working prototypes, but we're not very good at moving things out to scale. And if you understand the way innovations get into schools, a lot of them get into schools through the things districts buy, then you start to think about, well, if we create stronger connections to commercial enterprise, this is a natural way to move ideas to scale, rather than seeing them as the problem, seeing working with them as part of the solution.
Do you have any thoughts on ideas that might come about the fundamental organization of the schools? So if you develop ideas like you had about your model of the teaching role as a profession and how you might adjust that, how would you take that from the smaller school that you're working in, a smaller Stanford charter school, and take that to other districts?
Again, I think charter, in this case here, I think if we had anything that actually worked, the easiest place would be to take this would be the charter management organizations, because they're creating. Take this idea, put it into an existing district. Well, yeah, you could get there, but you got collective bargaining. This stuff is in collective bargaining agreements. One teacher, 20 kids. One teacher, 24 kids. So you can get there, but it's going to take a while. I mean, this is a case where I think part of the argument for charter schools was they would be engines of innovation. If you could get some of this stuff going, and enough of it was going, and it was clearly working, then eventually it might move into districts. But these are hard issues to move as soon as you go into collective bargaining agreements, and often kinds of state code too, as well.
I was wondering if, slightly different kind of change, kind of more macro topic, if given how little investment has been done in R&D to date, whether you think that the U.S. right now is at too premature a stage to undergo a transformative reform of public education. That is, whether your advice to the U.S. government would be, we first need to reform R&D before we reform public education, or whether it would be to reform public education and reform R&D in parallel.
Well, this is not a place where I think we can, where we have control. The reform of public education has been ongoing. I mean, serious efforts to reform public education have been ongoing for 20 years, and it's not going to stop. What we need to do is to figure out how to build as quickly as we can an R&D enterprise that will inform this work going forward. My greatest worry is, what will our children do? In 1995, I had an opportunity to be part of a group that was visiting in China. It was the same time that Jiang Zemin was here visiting the United States, and being seriously jet-lagged, and at that point the only English language television station was CNN. I was 3 o'clock in the morning, I'm listening to CNN, listening to Jiang Zemin give his talks about how he's going to transform the Chinese economy through science and technology into being a first world power by 2050. And this was 1995. And yeah, political rhetoric, science and technology, but we're visiting schools. And I'm seeing things in schools, particularly around technology use, that rival, and actually in some cases surpass, the best of what I'd seen in suburban, not urban, suburban school districts around technology integration. And those observations were haunting to me, because I keep thinking that, in 2050, the third world is at our back door when I'm living in the city of Chicago, which is part of what was, why we moved in to building an R&D enterprise around technology. Manufacturing jobs have gone. With the internet, an extraordinary number of white-collar jobs are now going abroad. I mean, one of the things that really stunned me is a colleague, Yuri Treisman, who's at Texas, has got a project. There's some technology, it's a firm in India that's doing some technology support in Texas, and they're teaching the Indians to speak with a Texas accent. I mean, but, this is, I think, manufacturing jobs are gone. increasingly large number of the more basic white-collar jobs are going abroad. What is going to be left for our children to do in this global economy? And so in some sense, when I think about No Child Left Behind, it's really, its objectives and goals are extremely important. I embrace them. But it's really solving the problem of the last half of the 20th century, not the problem of what a competitive educational system would look like for the 21st century. Because the key word here is ambitious academic work, not just higher levels of reading and arithmetic skills, but the only way our kids have a chance of having, in my view, a style of living like we've been accustomed to is an educational system that's really profoundly different than what currently exists.